to On the Trail with Miles James Dean. And we begin today's episode traveling through Pennsylvania. After crossing into Pennsylvania over the Calhoun Bridge, we prepared to rest for the night and found a wooden area not far off the road where the horses could be turned out for the night. This would be the first opportunity to use the generator that my daughter Sharonda had contributed for me to use if electricity wasn't available. It was a Honda 3000 quiet cool generator that ran on regular gas and, as in the name, was barely audible in the quiet of the night, allowing us to park overnight and not disturb anyone nearby. Of course, I could have pulled a 2-horse trailer without living quarters, and I could have camped out under the stars, and I could have roughed it like I did back in the day, but I couldn't expect my drivers to do the same or to be the same rugged person that I used to be, and between you and I, no longer wanted to be. So if after a long day of riding, lifting a 5-gallon gas can to fill up the generator that was going to provide me with the comfort of a hotel room was all that I had to do, then believe me when I say there was no shame in my game. That morning, we drove to the sign company where the logo of the company from whom the trailer was purchased to have its logo placed on the trailer. And that was the agreement for the 20% reduction in the cost of the trailer. Unfortunately, the installation took some discussion and much of the morning, and I was only able to ride for 3 hours that day. Route 1 was just over the Calhoun Bridge and was the straightest route to Cheyney State University, which is where I was headed, where I would have my third interview with a Black historian, where I also intended to rest for a couple of days before riding into the campus of Lincoln University, and then on to Temple University. And Route 1, just on the other side of the bridge, was too dangerous to ride on because, it was heavy trafficking. And therefore, the alternative was to travel on the city streets, and for this, I once again called on Sankofa. Although Blaze, my other mount, was a part of the family of horses at the barn in New Jersey, he was not owned by me. He was owned by Miss Marilyn Vaughn, who rode him on occasion, but not quite that often. And in fact, I did ride him myself. But although, I did put some miles on him, I didn't know him as I knew Sankofa. And I knew Sankofa was dependable in traffic and stressful situations. And so that was still to be determined by riding Sankofa. And the journey would be both a learning experience for both of us. So thus far into the journey, Sankofa had done much of the work, and I needed him to continue until I was able to put Blaze to the test. My gut instincts also told me that he wasn't ready. The stables in North Philly were approximately 30 miles away, and having lost much of the morning for being able to ride, I only managed 10 miles that day. It was on October the 3rd that we did arrive at the stables late in the afternoon and were greeted by cowboys who were waiting to help to board the horses for the night and show us where the trailer could also be parked for the night. That Friday, on the 5th of October, we headed out for Temple University, where a scheduled interview would be conducted with Dr. Molefi Asante, who graciously invited us onto the campus and who would talk about the theme assigned to Pennsylvania, which was the justification of slave revolts. Dr. Asante is the author of more than 100 books translated into dozens of languages and has published more than 500 articles and is recognized as one of the 10 most widely cited African American scholars of the day. It was indeed my honor to have him host my presence on the campus of Temple University and to embrace the mission of the journey that I was undertaking. After the interview, we traveled back to the stables in North Philadelphia to stay another night. And that morning, knowing that traveling through North Philadelphia during rush hour would be hazardous, we decided to wait and leave shortly after 9 a.m. We planned to travel up to 4 p.m. and then stop before afternoon rush hour traffic and then camp for the night. Sankofa was steady as a rock and kept me safe, and we covered at least 12 miles before stopping for lunch and rest. I rode him again from 1 to 4 and covered another 15 miles. His preconditioning was beginning to stand out, and his TPR, temperature, pulse rate, and respiration rate, those signs after exercise were quickly returning to normal. Up until now, our pace was mostly at a walk with intermittent lopes where we could. Sankofa's lope was smooth and easy to ride, and he preferred to lope rather than to walk. I rode in a hardwood saddle. Here you see the saddle. It didn't have any padding, and the back and forth sliding motion in the saddle at the lope kept me or the inside of my thighs from chafing. And I made the entire 5,000 miles in this saddle, and you can see it's a little worn and without a blister, by the way. So the next morning we camped just outside of the university, and I decided to ride Blaze. And for the most part, Joyce was behind me for much of the distance. But that morning, the decision was made for her to travel the half mile or so ahead of me and onto the campus. I was to find out later that the decision when riding Blaze for Joyce to drive ahead of me was the safest decision that I could have made. And perhaps you horse people can guess why. And I'll get into it more deeper when we get into the West Virginia episode. The students and Dr. Virgilette Goffin, PhD Professor of African Studies, were waiting for our arrival. And the students enrolled in this HBCU institution, they understood the meaning of the word Sankofa. As you can see here, I was sitting in the classes, and there I had to take Sankofa out because they wanted to see him. There you see me riding with Blaze, and there I'm with Dr. Gaffin. But the students, they wanted to see this horse, and I took him out, and he just stood there with his elegance, knowing that he was the center of attention. Cheyney State University is an HBCU, a historical black university, and most notably is America's oldest black institution of higher education, founded by Quaker Humphrey, I believe a Quaker, and that was in 1837, as the African Institute, and renamed the Institute for Colored Youth before being renamed again as Cheyney State. It had a mission to educate people of African descent and prepare them for teachers. Again, this was a time almost 30 years before the Civil War to, quote, free African American slaves, was even 30 years before that war took place. And we'll talk more about the Civil War when we get into Tennessee. So the Cheyney State was situated on 250 acres of land, and the administration cordially invited us to stay for the night, and actually for a couple of nights, providing a grazing area for the horses. One of the items that I did carry with me, and I'll show you later a picture of it, was a corral about 4 foot high. It was a portable corral made of 2 rows of rope and several thin PVC poles, which, if you inserted them into the ground, provided additional stability. And the corral was easy to assemble and had a battery to keep an electrical current running through the top of the rope. It enclosed about 400 square foot of ground space that was enough footage to keep the horses comfortable and occupied for feeding on the grass for the night. In West Virginia's series, I'll explain how and why that same corral became useless. The next morning, we packed up and began moving in the direction of Lincoln University, just 25 miles farther south. And Lincoln University's campus was located on 422 acres of real estate near the town of Oxford, PA. Lincoln is noted as a historical black college that was the first to grant college degrees. So as in Cheney, we were met by the students and Dr. Poe. There you see Dr. Poe and Sankofa, of course, who I was writing, again, most of the time. Lincoln University, I did attend some classes there and talk to the students about my journey and how it was my way of paying down on the debt that I owed. And speaking about the debt, there was a book written by Randall Robinson entitled The Debt, and I encourage the students to read it. The 2 central arguments in the book, both are, one, an indictment of the past wrongs and what white America owes to blacks, and considers the payment to be in the form of reparations, which in itself is very controversial. But the second was that, or is that, and most central to my project, was that the Africans, we Africans, have a debt, and one that we owe our ancestors and to each other. And the central theme that I was exploring, which was how our ancestors helped with the exploration, settlement, and development of this country, and how my way of honoring them was to bring to light their history, which was not so much talked about. And the students and I discussed in what manner possibly, or even if they felt that they had a debt that they needed to repay for what our ancestors gave them and how they could repay it. And that was, again, the conversations that the students and I had. So by now, we were able to, after leaving Lincoln University, access another highway which led us onto Route 1, which had a grassy median that I chose to ride on. And it wasn't before long, about an hour or so later, that I was stopped by law enforcement who, while obviously supportive of the physicality of the endeavor, as well as the mission we were undertaking, still felt compelled to insist that the horse was not allowed to travel on the highway and requested that I exit at the next off-ramp, which was 10 miles away. Well, actually, I had 10 miles to go before reaching the destination that I wanted to reach. So the police officer, he sped off, and I suppose I expected him to be waiting at the next intersection, for me to exit, but he wasn't there. I assumed one of 3 things. 1, either he took it for granted that I would obey his directive, or 2, he had understood that horses did have the rights on the highway, or 3, he just gave me access to the highway by not continuing to monitor me. Now, I'm sure there are other interpretations as to why he wasn't there, but I opted for the second interpretation, and that was that he did find out that horses were allowed on Route 1 legally. And of course, I relied on the third one, which that it was his way of allowing me to continue, but just not being there, out of sight, out of mind, so to speak. There were several more exits to encounter before reaching my destination, and so we just loped along. That was a good riding day for both of us. It was Sankofa's first opportunity to stretch out his lope for a measurable distance, and he handled the traffic on either side of us because we rode in the median. He handled it wonderfully. Joyce and I coordinated our positions, and she was usually behind me for most of the time, but that would change as we got further into the journey, and I'll explain why we did decide to change after the incident in West Virginia. But we had by then been out on the road for a week, several weeks rather, and the website, while still up and visible, still had technical issues prohibiting me from updating on the site. And while the journey, however, was still being promoted with the assistance of Cheyenne out of Colorado, who was working diligently behind the scenes on behalf of the journey's mission, sending out promotional materials to media outlets in many of the cities in which she knew we would be passing through and staying for one or more days. And she was also responsible for finding the path from Washington, D.C. that would take me to Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. She was, I tell you, almost solely responsible for the public's knowledge of my being on the road undertaking this journey. And it was for her efforts in contacting media outlets that led the newspaper articles to come out and interview us. But we still were lacking national coverage, and again, several weeks into the journey. And this was becoming more and more frustrating as, the search for a new website developer was underway. And the hope of acquiring donations to help defray the weekly costs for the driver, the photographer, the gas, the tolls, the feed, the hay, and food was becoming a concern. And in our next episode, we will enter Maryland and Washington, D.C., and I'll introduce you to one of the most important men in the federal government as it pertains to Black history. So stay tuned for that. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't, where you, again, will see the entire interviews as they come up. And until then, happy trails to you until we meet again.